The shuttle was small. That was the first thing people always noticed. Every other delegation that arrived at Velm Prime came in wide. Heavy ships with bright markings and escort fighters. The Drafa came in warships even when there was no war. The Lumini came in vessels that glowed like small suns. The Velnorians came in ships so large they had to park in a separate orbit. The human shuttle was small, quiet, and a little old. It had no escort. It had no markings other than a simple blue circle on its side, the symbol of Earth's diplomatic corps. It docked at the smallest bay on the station, the one reserved for low priority arrivals. Ambassador Jun-Ho stepped out first. He was a tall man, lean, with short dark hair that had started going gray at the sides. He wore a plain dark suit with a single small pin on the lapel, the same blue circle as the shuttle. He carried a black bag over one shoulder and a flat reading tablet under his arm. He looked like someone going to a very long, very boring meeting. Behind him came Murray, his chief aide. She was younger, sharper-eyed, and she moved fast. She had already reviewed the session agenda 3 times on the flight over and had a list of notes on her own tablet that was longer than most people's reports. She did not look bored. She looked like someone ready to fight. Docking fee has been increased again, she said as they walked through the bay corridor. 15%. No notice, no explanation. Pay it, Jun-Ho said. It's the 3rd increase this year. I know. They don't charge the Drafa a docking fee at all. I know that too. Murray pressed her lips together and said nothing more about it. That was how most of their there went. She brought the problems. He acknowledged them, and then they kept walking. Velm Prime was a massive station, old enough that its earliest sections had been built before humanity had learned to make fire. It orbited a dead star at the edge of the Velm system, chosen as neutral ground centuries ago because no single species had a claim to it. Over time it had grown into something like a small city, thousands of rooms, hundreds of corridors, docking bays, chambers, meeting halls, eating areas built for every kind of body and every kind of food. At its center was the Grand Chamber, where the Galactic Council met. It could seat over 3,000 beings at once. On full session days, it was nearly full. Humanity had been admitted to the Council 16 years ago. It had been a close vote even then. Many members had argued that humans were too young, a species too unstable, too violent. The faction that supported admission had won by arguing that it was better to have humans inside the tent than outside it. Not exactly a glowing endorsement. Since then, humanity's single seat had been placed in the far left corner of the chamber's lower tier. It was technically a full seat with full access to all open sessions, but on votes that carried real weight, humanity's single voice counted for a fraction of what even a minor species could bring. On the votes that truly mattered, trade agreements, territorial claims, military sanctions, our Earth's vote had never once changed an outcome. Jun-Ho had been ambassador for 6 of those 16 years. Before him, 2 others had held the post. The first had come in loud and eager and had been quietly crushed within a year. The second had been competent and careful and had accomplished almost nothing. When Jun-Ho arrived, he had read both their reports, cover to cover, then read the full Council procedural code from the first page to the last. then read 16 years of session transcripts. Then he had sat down in the corner seat and said very little for the next 6 years. The session hall was already filling when Junho and Murray arrived. Beings of dozens of shapes moved through the space, some tall and thin, some wide and low to the ground, some that moved in ways that were hard to follow with human eyes. The noise was constant, a layered sound of languages being filtered through translation earpieces worn by every delegate. Junho found their seats and sat down. Murray sat beside him, tablet open, already working. Around them the other delegations settled in. No one greeted the humans. A few glanced over the way you glance at furniture. Kale arrived loudly as he always did. He was the Draft Dominion's war delegate, title that said everything about how the draft thought about diplomacy. He was large, with a dark-scaled hide and a way of moving that suggested he was always about to start something. His delegation was 8 strong. They took up a wide block of seats near the center of the chamber. As Kale passed the human section, he said something to the delegate beside him, and both of them made a sound that the translation earpiece rendered as laughter. Murray's hand tightened on her tablet. Junho did not look up. Grand Arbiter Voss called the session to order from the raised platform at the front of the chamber. Voss was Velnorian, old, gray-skinned, with 4 arms that he moved slowly and deliberately, like someone who had been doing this for a very long time and had stopped being surprised by anything. His voice was flat and carried well. He read the session agenda without expression. The primary item was listed at the bottom almost as an afterthought. A proposal submitted by the Draft Dominion, co-signed by 11 other council members, to reclassify Earth and its 3 colony worlds under the Interstellar Protectorate framework. Junho had read the full proposal 3 times. He understood exactly what it meant. The Protectorate framework was a legal structure that had been used 11 times in Council history. Every species that had ever been applied to had lost the right to make decisions about their own territory. Some of them were still under it 300 years later. The proposal was 300 pages long. The summary, as read by Voss, took 4 minutes. When Voss finished, Jira, the High Speaker of the Luminia Accord, rose and offered the first supporting comment. She spoke warmly, as she always did, in that soft musical voice her species used. She talked about humanity's developmental needs, about the Council's duty of care, about how the framework was not subjugation but guidance. She was very good at making a cage sound like a gift. Several other delegates spoke in support. No one spoke against. When the floor was opened for initial responses, Junho's section was passed over without being offered the chance to speak. Procedural slight, so casual it was almost impressive. Murray opened her mouth. Junho touched her arm once. Lightly, she closed her mouth. When the session broke for the midday recess, Kale walked past the human seats again. This time he stopped. He looked down at Junho the way someone looks at a stray animal sitting on their doorstep, enjoying the proceedings. Premen, he said. His translation earpiece rendered the last word with a specific tone, not quite mocking, but close enough that everyone nearby understood it. Junho looked up at him. His face was calm, politely attentive, the way teacher looks at a student who has said Something incorrect but not worth correcting yet. Very much, Junho said. Thank you for asking. Kale stared at him for a moment as if expecting something more. When nothing came, he made that sound. Again the laugh and walked away. Murray watched him go. You should have said something, anything. I said something. Something that mattered. Junho set his tablet down and looked at the empty chamber floor. The session would resume in an hour. The proposal would move forward through its stages. Over the next 3 days, the vote, when it came, would not be close. Silence is data collection, he said. Murray stared at him. What does that mean? He picked up his tablet again. On it was the full 300-page protectorate resolution he had been reading since they boarded the shuttle. He was on page 247. It means I'm still reading, he said. And he went back to the page. The second day of the session was worse than the first. Not because anything violent happened. Not because anyone raised a weapon or broke a rule. It was worse in the quiet way that a slow leak is worse than a flood, steady, constant, and designed to make you feel like the problem was you. The morning session opened with what the agenda called an open reflection period, which in practice meant that any delegate who wished to speak about the protectorate resolution could do so without a time limit. 11 delegates spoke, each one of them in their own way talked about humanity as if humanity were not in the room. They used words like primitive, developmental stage, and incomplete, societal evolution, and historically reactive threat profile. One delegate from a species called the Merc used an extended metaphor comparing Earth to a child who had found a knife. Not dangerous on purpose, just dangerous by nature. The chamber listened politely. Several delegates nodded. Junho sat in the corner and took notes. He wrote down the name of every delegate who spoke. He wrote down the exact words they used. He wrote down the timestamps. He wrote down who laughed and when and at what clear's throat. He wrote it all in a small, neat script. On paper, actual paper which he had brought specifically because it could not be remotely accessed, scanned, or hacked. When Murray had first seen him pull out a paper notebook, she had looked at him the way you look at someone who has shown up to a spaceship race on a bicycle. Now she watched him write and said nothing. After the morning session, they split up. Junho went back to their quarters and kept reading. Murray went to work. The station had a dozen levels below the main diplomatic floors, maintenance corridors, service areas, small restrooms used by support staff and junior delegates who had nowhere else to go during recesses. These were the spaces where the real conversations happened, not the speeches, not the formal exchanges, the real ones, the quiet, tired, careful conversations between people who had opinions they could not say out loud in the chamber. Murray had spent 6 years mapping those conversations. She knew which junior delegates were unhappy with their senior leadership. She knew which species resented the draft's growing influence. She knew which individuals in the council's own administrative staff quietly thought the protectorate framework was being misused. She had never tried to turn any of this into a vote. She had never needed to, until now. She had only been building what Junho called the record. She found Rin in a small side corridor. On level 4, Rin was a meld, a species that looked to human eyes like a column of slowly moving gray smoke that had learned to hold a shape. Rin was the council's official recorder. For this session, which meant Rin was present at every session, every side, meeting every procedural event, and Rin remembered all of it with perfect accuracy. Mel did not forget things. It was both their gift and sometimes their burden. "I need a timestamp," Murray said, without any introduction. Rin's form shifted slightly, the way Mel shifted when they were paying close attention. For what event? The draft co-signature on the Protectorate resolution, the exact moment it was filed, not the public record timestamp, the actual filing moment from your personal record. Rin was quiet for a moment. "That is not classified information." "I know, that's why I'm asking you." Another pause, then Rin gave her the timestamp down to the second. It was 4 hours earlier than the public record showed. Murray wrote it down, then she asked for 2 more timestamps, the moment the Lumina Accord had added their co-signature and the moment the resolution had been submitted to the council registry. Rin gave them both. All 3 were earlier than the public record, not by much but enough. "Thank you," Murray said. "You are welcome," Rin said. And then, in the careful way that Mel sometimes said things that were more than they appeared, "I have always found human record-keeping habits thorough." Murray almost smiled. "We learn from the best." She spent the rest of the afternoon moving through the lower levels, collecting similar small pieces of information from 3 other sources. Lumini, junior delegate who had been excluded from the internal vote on the co-signature, America administrative aide who had processed the resolutions, paperwork, and a retired council notary who spent most sessions sitting in the observation gallery because she had nothing better to do and had seen enough in 40 years to have opinions about everything. None of them were asked to do anything. None of them were offered anything. Murray only asked questions, and she only asked for things that were technically available to anyone who knew to ask. When she was done, she had a folder of timestamps, cross-references, and public record inconsistencies that would have taken a full legal team weeks to assemble. She brought it back to their quarters that evening and put it on the table in front of John Ho. He glanced at it, then he went back to the document he was reading. "Is it what you needed?" she asked. "More than," he said. That night, the 3rd delegate gathering of the session was held, a social event, technically optional, practically mandatory for anyone who wanted to maintain good standing. It was held in one of the station's larger common rooms with food and drink, configured for a dozen different species. John Ho and Murray attended because not attending would be noted. Kale held court near the center of the room, surrounded by delegates from 4 different species, all of them listening to him with the attention people give to someone they are slightly afraid of. His voice carried. He was telling a story, a long theatrical story about a diplomatic mission he had led years ago in which a younger, weaker species had attempted to negotiate trade rights they had no business asking for. The way he told it, the whole thing was a comedy. He played all the parts. He did the younger species voice in a high, confused register. Everyone around him laughed. Jun Ho stood near the far wall with the glass of water and listened. He was not the only one who noticed the story. Tyra, the Lumini high speaker, caught Jun Ho's eye from across the room. She held his gaze for just a moment, not warmly, not coldly, but with a kind of measuring look, as if she were recalculating something. Then she looked away. Later, as the gathering wound down, Cal walked past Junho one more time. He stopped the way he had the day before, with that same look, the one that was meant to make Junho feel small. "You've been very quiet, Ambassador," Cal said. "Most beings in your position would at least attempt a counter proposal, a statement of objection, something." He paused. "Unless, of course, there is nothing to say." Junho looked at him. "I'm still listening," he said. "Listening," Cal repeated. He said the word the way someone repeats a word they find ridiculous. "To what end?" Junho tilted his head slightly. "To every end," he said, and he walked away. Back in their quarters, after Murray had finally stopped working and gone to sleep, Junho sat alone at the small desk. The full Protectorate resolution was on his screen. He had finished reading it hours ago. Now he was reading something else, a document that was not part of any council agenda, a set of technical specifications, a fleet readiness report, a power output summary from a facility that did not appear on any council registry. He read for a long time, then he picked up his communicator and made a call. The connection was encrypted 5 ways and routed through 4 separate relay points. The person on the other end picked up on the first signal. Junho did not greet them. He said only, "Begin the count, 72 hours. Then he closed the call, set the communicator down, and went to bed. He slept easily and well, the way person sleeps when they have finished preparing and are simply waiting for the moment to arrive. The third and final day of the session arrived the way the end of something always arrives quietly and then all at once. The corridors of Velm Prime were busier than usual that morning. Delegates moved faster. There was a low electricity in the air, the kind that gathers around events that everyone already knows the outcome of but still wants to witness in person. The Protectorate resolution vote was the last item on the day's agenda, scheduled for the final hour of the session. By the time Junho and Murray arrived at the Grand Chamber, the gallery above the main floor was already full. Observers from 40 star systems had come to watch. Journalists, or whatever the nearest equivalent was, in a dozen different species, were arranged in the press section with their recording equipment. Even some retired delegates who no longer held active seats had returned to the station just for this. The resolution reclassifying Earth as a Protectorate was considered one of the more significant votes of the decade, not because the outcome was in doubt, but because it would set a precedent. A young species, formally and legally folded into the Council's management structure, a clean example for the future. The main session opened with routine business, trade route adjustments, border arbitration between 2 minor species in the outer systems, a resource allocation review. Junho sat through all of it with the same flat attention he brought to everything. He reviewed his notes, he checked the session clock, he drank water. He was extraordinarily boring to watch, and the few observers who had their viewing equipment aimed at the human section gradually shifted focus elsewhere. Murray sat beside him and said nothing. She had stopped asking questions the previous night, something about the way Junho had slept calmly, fully, without the restlessness that had marked every other night of the trip, had told her that the preparation was finished. Whatever was going to happen was now in motion. Her job now was simply to be present. When the vote session was finally called, Voss moved through the procedural opening with the efficiency of someone who had run several thousand of these and found all of them equally uninteresting. He read the resolution title, he summarized its contents, he confirmed the co-signatories. He noted that the resolution had passed all preliminary review stages without challenge. Then the floor was open for final statements. The draft delegate Kale went first. He always went first when the outcome favored him. It was a habit of his that everyone in the chamber had noticed, but no one had ever formally objected to. He stood at the speaker's podium with the relaxed confidence of someone who had already won and knew it. He spoke for 11 minutes. The speech was, in its way, impressive. Not because it was honest, but because it was crafted. He talked about stability. He talked about the Council's long history of guiding younger species toward better outcomes. He talked about humanity's documented pattern of self-endangerment, the old wars, the environmental damage, the century of near collapse that Earth had only barely survived. He cited Council intelligence reports. He cited economic assessments. He cited the opinion of 7 separate interstellar development bodies, all of which had concluded that Earth's trajectory, left unmanaged, posed a long-term risk not only to humanity but to the surrounding systems. He did not say any of it cruelly. That was the most sophisticated part. He said it with something that sounded on the surface like genuine concern. He used the word stewardship 4 times. He used the word protection 7 times. He never used the word control. When he sat down, the chamber applause, a sound like static produced differently by 100 different species, was long and full. 2 more delegates spoke in support. Then Tira rose and gave a shorter statement, warm and musical, that essentially agreed with everything Kale had said, but in a softer register. When she sat down, Voss confirmed that no further statements had been registered and moved to the formal vote. Each delegation's vote was called in order of Council seniority. The responses came quickly: in favor, favor, in favor, abstain, in favor. The running count on the main display above the chamber floor climbed steadily upward. The numbers were, as expected, moving in one direction. When the count reached humanity's position, Voss called it without any particular emphasis: the human seat won. Vote non-binding. In the press section, a journalist from the Merrick Systems was already composing the summary of the session. It was technically premature, but no one expected a reason to change it. Then Voss moved to seal the resolution. His hand, all 4 of them, moved toward the formal sealing console at the front of the arbiter's platform. Once the seal was placed, the resolution would become active law. Earth and its 3 colony worlds would fall under the protectorate framework within 30 standard days. And Junho raised one finger. He did not stand, he did not speak, he did not raise his hand or wave or make any dramatic gesture. He simply lifted his right index finger from the surface of his desk and held it upward, quietly, calmly, the way you might signal a server in a restaurant. The first person to notice was Rin. The meld recorder's form shifted. Immediately, a sharp, precise movement that in meld body language meant Recognition of a significant procedure. Event, RIN's official recorder light. Clicked on. Then a junior Lumini delegate noticed and leaned over to say something to the delegate beside her. And that delegate looked, and then another delegate looked, and within about 10 seconds, there was a chain of confused attention spreading outward from the human corner, like a ripple on still water. Voss stopped, his hands paused above the ceiling console. He turned and looked at the human section with the expression of someone who had, in all his centuries of running sessions, never expected to see this specific thing. The chamber noise rose sharply, then cut away to something close to silence. Kale straightened in his seat. He looked at Junho, then he looked at Vass. "What is that?" he said, and his voice came through the translation system flat and hard. Vass said nothing for a moment. He was very clearly going through something in his memory, something old. Then he looked at the chamber recorder station and said in a voice that was carefully neutral, "Confirm current procedural status." RIN's voice came through the chamber, speakers precise and clear. Under Galactic Council Procedural Code, Statute 7, Article 3, a raised single finger from any seated council member, delivered before formal sealing of a resolution, constitutes a registered request for an evidence presentation. Pause. The sealing process is suspended by law until the presenting member has delivered their evidence and the chamber has formally acknowledged receipt. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the silence of 300 species trying to rapidly search their memory for the last time Statute 7, Article 3 had ever actually been invoked, and coming up with nothing. Kale turned to his legal aide and said something fast and low. His aide responded fast and low. Kale's expression shifted through several things very quickly: confusion, annoyance, and then something that looked for just a moment like the first trace of concern. Vass set his hands down from the ceiling console. He looked at Junho. His voice was very even when he spoke. "Ambassador Junho, the floor is yours." Junho lowered his finger. He reached into his bag and removed a small silver drive which he placed in the chamber connection port at his desk. He looked up at the main display screen above the chamber floor. He looked around the room, all 300 species, the press section, the gallery, the centuries of authority arranged in a great arc before him. He did not look nervous. He did not look triumphant. He looked like a person who had been waiting a long time for an appointment and had finally been called. "Thank you," he said. "I'll need the main display in approximately 4 minutes." Nobody laughed. The main display screen above the grand chamber floor was 30 m wide. It had shown maps of wars, graphs of economic collapse, evidence in trial sessions that had ended entire governments. It was not a screen that was easily impressed. What Junho put on it impressed even the screen. He did not open with a speech. He did not introduce himself. The chamber knew who he was. He simply stood, pressed the first control on his desk, and let the display do the talking. The first thing that appeared was a document, simple, clean, easy to read. It was the Galactic Council's own classified intelligence assessment of humanity, the report that the Council's Internal Security Division updated periodically on all member species. It covered military capability, technological level, energy production, FTL range, population metrics, and overall strategic threat rating. The report was stamped with the Council's own official seal. It was not a forgery. It was the real thing, obtained through legitimate channels, part of the public record that any member species had the legal right to access about assessments conducted on themselves. At the top of the document, in clear text, was the date of the most recent update. The document was 11 years old. Jun-Ho gave the chamber 10 seconds to read that, then he spoke, still standing still calm. This is the most current assessment the Galactic Council holds on humanity. 11 years old, not updated, not reviewed, not flagged for revision. He paused, because no one thought it was necessary. He let that sit for a moment. Then he pressed the second control. The document was replaced by a comparison table. On the left side were the capability metrics from the 11-year-old Council report. Humanities listed: FTL range, power output, military vessel count, weapons technology rating. On the right side was a new column labeled simply current. The numbers on the right were not slightly higher than the left. They were not modestly improved. They were, in several cases, so different from the original figures that the table looked, for a moment, like it was comparing two entirely different species. The FTL range listed in the Council report was 1/3 of what the right column showed. The power output figures on the right were nearly 4 times the assessed level. The military capability ratings on the right had no equivalent in the Council's rating system at all. The system simply did not have a category that fit. The chamber noise started low and grew. Kale was leaning forward in his seat. His legal aide was typing fast. 3 other delegates had turned to their staff with the specific urgent posture of people saying, quietly and urgently, "Is this real?" Voss said nothing. He watched the screen with the expression of someone doing very fast and very serious arithmetic. Jun-Ho pressed a third control. The table disappeared. The main display split into 2 live video feeds. The left feed showed a man in a command chair. He was broad-shouldered, gray-haired, and wearing a dark uniform, with no decorations except a single small rank marking on the collar. He was sitting very still, the way soldiers sit when they are at rest, but could not truly be called relaxed. Behind him was a bridge, wide, clean, lit in blue-white light, with stations staffed by crew members who were going about their work with the quiet efficiency of people who had trained for a very long time. Through the viewport behind the command chair, space was visible, and in that space, arranged in precise formation, were ships, dozens of them, then more again. Each one was large. Each one was dark-hulled and cleanly, built with no markings visible from outside. They floated in perfect stillness, like a held breath. Jun-Ho said, "This is Admiral Sung-Ho, currently commanding the human fleet. 140 vessels of a class that does not appear in any council registry because it was built entirely within sovereign human space and was never required to be registered under any treaty humanity has signed." He let the camera hold on the ships for 5 full seconds. "They have been at silent alert status for 48 hours. Admiral Sung-Ho, please confirm operational status." The man in the command chair looked directly at the camera. His voice was flat and even. "All vessels fully operational, crew at Station standing by. The right feed then came up. A woman stood in a large facility, clean and well lit, with machinery behind her that filled the entire frame. She had short dark hair and wore a lab coat over her uniform. She was holding a small device, a reading instrument of some kind, and her expression was the calm, precise expression of a scientist who has spent years checking numbers and is comfortable with what they say. Junho said, "This is Dr. Hannah, head of the Chemian Deep Energy Project. 18 months ago, the project achieved successful sustained output from a next-generation energy system." He paused. "The system makes Earth fully energy independent, the resource leverage that several council members have used directly and indirectly to limit humanity's development options. That leverage no longer exists." Dr. Hannah looked at the camera and gave one small, precise nod. Then the feed closed. The left feed, Sungho and the fleet, stayed open. The chamber was not silent anymore. It was the opposite of silent. It was a wall of noise, every translation eyepiece in the room fighting to keep up with the number of beings talking at once. Kale had stood up without appearing to realize he had done so. His chair was pushed back. His legal aid had stopped typing. The Merc delegate had turned fully around in his seat to look at the draft block with an expression that might have been vindicated. The journalist from the Merc Systems had also stopped writing his pre-prepared summary. Voss raised one hand, all four of them actually, which in Velnorian body language was the equivalent of an extremely firm call for order. The noise came down, not all the way, but enough. Junho closed the fleet feed. The main display went dark. He looked out at the chamber. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. He spoke the way someone speaks when they have thought about something for a very long time and are now simply saying what they have already decided. "We did not come here to threaten anyone," he said. "We came here because we believed in this institution. We have sat in that seat for 16 years. We listened to every speech, every vote, every comment made in this chamber about what humanity is or is not capable of. We sat through all of it. We took notes. And while we were sitting here, we were also building quietly, carefully, and entirely within the bounds of every treaty and agreement humanity has ever signed." He looked at Kale, not with anger, with something steadier than anger. "You may still pass this resolution. You have the votes. Nothing I've shown you today changes that count, but I want the official record of this session to show that before this resolution was sealed, the Galactic Council was made fully aware of the current state of human capability. Every number on that screen, every ship in that formation, every watt of independent power output." He paused. "The record will show that you knew, and the record will show what you decided to do with that knowledge." He reached down and removed his drive from the connection port. He sat down. He folded his hands on the desk. The chamber was quiet in a completely different way than it had been quiet before. Before, it had been the quiet of something already finished. Now it was the quiet of something that had just been torn open and was waiting to see what came next. Voss looked at the ceiling console. Then he looked at the chamber. Then he looked at Junho. His expression gave away almost nothing, but it gave away just enough. There was something in it that had not been there an hour ago. Not fear. Voss was too old for fear, but something close to recalculation. He cleared his throat. The chamber will take a recess, he said. We will resume in 2 hours. No one argued. No one pointed out that a recess had not been scheduled and was not procedurally required. They simply stood and began to move in the way that a crowd moves when it has too many urgent conversations to have and not enough private space to have them in. Murray leaned over to Junho as the chamber began to empty. She said nothing for a moment. Then you built a fleet and didn't tell me. I told you what you needed to know when you needed to know it, he said. There are 140 warships sitting outside this station. 142 actually. The count in the report was 2 sessions ago. She stared at him. He looked back at her with the same expression he had worn for 3 days, that patient, quiet, slightly distant look that she now understood was not blankness at all. It was the look of someone who had already seen how this ended. The 2-hour recess lasted 4 hours. Nobody announced the extension. The session simply did not resume when it was supposed to, and none of the 300 delegates went to Voss to demand it. They were all too busy. The corridors of Velm Prime, which had a particular sound. On normal session days, a steady, layered hum of 1,000 quiet conversations had a different sound. Now faster, more urgent, the kind of sound that a place makes when the thing everyone assumed was settled has suddenly become unsettled. Junho and Murray sat in their quarters and waited. Murray had made tea and then not drunk it. She sat across from Junho with her tablet in her hands, but was not reading anything on it. What happens if they vote yes anyway? She asked. Then they vote yes, Junho said. And then the record shows they did it, knowing everything they now know, and the species who abstained, the ones who weren't sure, will need to decide what kind of institution they want to be part of, a council that uses the protectorate framework as a legal cover for taking what it wants from species it's decided to underestimate. He picked up his tea and drank it. That's a different kind of council than the one most of the smaller members signed up to join. Murray thought about that. You're betting on the small ones. I'm betting on the record, he said. Record is the point. Whatever they decide today, the record now says something it didn't say this morning. When the session resumed and the chamber refilled, the atmosphere was visibly different. People sat differently, less settled, more careful, the way people sit when they are not sure where the ground is anymore. Kale was in his seat, but the theatrical ease he usually wore like a second uniform had been replaced by something tighter and more controlled. His legal team was arranged around him in a close cluster, and they had clearly been working hard during the recess because 3 of them looked exhausted. Voss called the session back to order. He confirmed that the evidence presentation by the human delegation had been formally received and logged. He confirmed that the resolution vote would now proceed. He asked if any delegation wished to revise their registered vote. The first revision came from a small species called the Yelm, one of the 11 co-signatories on the resolution. Their delegate stood and said in a short, careful statement that the Yelm were withdrawing their co-signature, pending a full review of the new information. The statement was polite, technically worded, and utterly clear in what it meant. Before the delegate had finished sitting down, a second co-signatory delegation sent a written revision to the arbiters. Desk, they were not withdrawing their vote, but they were changing it from in favor to abstain. A third from the outer systems, a species that had added their name to the resolution, mostly because the deny had asked them to, and they had not felt they could say no, submitted a full withdrawal. Their delegate did not even stand. They simply sent the document and looked at the floor. Kale stood up. He requested the floor. Voss gave it. What followed was the most carefully constructed 7 minutes Kale had ever produced in the chamber. He did not yell, he did not accuse, he refrained. He explained very smoothly that the resolution had always been intended as a collaborative arrangement, that the Council's relationship with humanity was one of mutual development, that the new information presented by the human ambassador was, in fact, a positive sign of human progress that the Council had in many ways helped to foster. He used the word partnership 6 times. It was impressive to watch. It was also, everyone in the chamber understood. Retreat. When the vote was finally called, the final count was 201 in favor, 67 against, and 32 abstentions. Technically, the resolution had passed. The threshold for passage was a simple majority of voting members. But Voss did not seal it. He looked at the count, he looked at the chamber, he made a procedural note. His flat, expressionless voice that, given the significant number of late revisions and the formal evidentiary presentation on record, the resolution would be placed in a mandatory legal review period of 90 days before sealing could proceed. It was an option available to the Grand Arbiter under a rarely used clause in the Council charter, and it was entirely within his authority to invoke it. He invoked it. The review period would last 90 days. During that time, the resolution could be revised, amended, or withdrawn. It could also theoretically be pushed forward unchanged at the end of the 90 days, but everyone in the chamber understood that the political landscape of those 90 days would look nothing like it had this morning. The session was formally closed. In the days that followed, the station buzzed. 3 more co-signatories sent private communications to the human delegation asking to discuss the new context. Kale sent nothing, but his second-in-command sent a brief and very carefully worded note that congratulated humanity on its development achievements, without once acknowledging that those achievements had made the resolution legally and practically unenforceable. Tura, the Lumini High Speaker, requested a private meeting. It was the first time in 6 years she had asked to speak with Junho one-on-one. She arrived at the meeting room alone without any staff, which was unusual for her. She sat down across from Junho and looked at him for a moment in silence. "I would like to understand," she said, "what humanity wants from this council." "The same thing everyone else wants," Junho said, "a fair seat, a real voice. The ability to make our own choices." She studied him. "You have been here for 6 years. You could have shown any of this earlier." "No," he said simply, "we couldn't, not until we were sure it was enough, and not until we had read every rule in the book carefully enough to use them properly." He met her eyes. "We are patient people, Speaker, when the stakes are high enough." She left the meeting without making any commitments, but 3 weeks later the Lumina Accord submitted a formal amendment proposal to the Council. Membership criteria, a proposal that, if Passed would give humanity seat a full weighted vote on all resolutions equal to any other member of comparable scale. Back on Earth, the news traveled fast. It was not received the way a military victory was received. There were no parades, there was no fire in the streets. People read the reports over breakfast, discussed them at work, explained them to their children in simple words. In most homes it landed the way serious good news usually lands, with a quiet deep exhale and then return to the ordinary things that still needed doing. Mary flew home for 5 days before the next session. She sat with her family in their apartment and watched the news coverage on low volume while her mother made food in the kitchen and her younger brother asked questions she mostly answered honestly. She got a message on her communicator from an unknown address. When she opened it, it was from Ren. It said, "I have always suspected you were more than you appeared. Now I am certain are." She smiled at her screen for a long time. On the station, Admiral Sung-ho received the order to stand the fleet down from silent alert status. He read it twice, then called his crew to attention over the shipwide channel. He told them the alert was lifted. He told them they had done their job simply by existing, by being there ready and unseen until the moment came when being seen was the whole point. He logged the order in the ship's record, then he leaned back in his command chair and said to no one in particular, "We were never the punchline, we were the setup." 3 weeks after the session, the new council seating chart was issued for the upcoming term. It was a routine administrative document released without fanfare, but inside it, buried in the updated floor arrangement, was one small change. The human delegation seats had been moved, no longer in the far left corner of the lower tier, no longer tucked away from the center. They were at the main table now, properly, formally, without asterisk or qualification. On the first day of the new session, Jun-ho walked into the grand chamber, found his new seat and sat down. The room was filling around him. A few delegates glanced over, but differently than before, not with dismissal, with the careful, measuring attention that beings give to someone they have decided to take seriously. Kale did not make eye contact. Chiro gave a small, genuine nod across the room. Voss waited until Jun-ho was fully settled before calling the session to order. A small thing, a deliberate thing. Jun-ho uncapped his pen. He opened his notebook, the paper one, the one that could not be hacked, and wrote the date. At the top of a clean page, he looked at the session agenda. He made one small mark beside the first item. There was still a great deal of work to do. The council was a slow machine, old and complicated, full of factions and histories and competing interests that would take years to fully understand and longer to properly influence. The fleet would still need to be maintained. The energy project would still need to be developed. The smaller species who had quietly watched the whole event and drawn their own conclusions would need to be met with, listened to, and treated with the respect that humanity itself had been denied for 16 years. None of it would be fast, none of it would be simple, some of it would be boring, and some of it would be difficult, and some of it would feel at times like sitting quietly in a corner while people who should know better said things that should not be said. But that was all right. Humans were, above everything else, patient. He did not smile. He He simply began to read the first page of the day's agenda and got to work.